lot of money is being made by a lot of people, not just in the circle of the White House. We all know how that's been going. We've watched them short oil, and we've watched Trump sort of create a culture of manipulation that allows people to profit from these crises and wars. This is all part of it. So there's no incentive for him to take the position that you and I do. You and I aren't profiting from these things, but they are. And I think that's the simple explanation. Now, Larry Kudlow, of course, is a little different because he's emotionally committed. This is more important to him than anything else. And he's going to sign on for anything that promises the total annihilation of Iran. And literally, that's what these people are talking about. My point is that's not going to happen. It can't be achieved, but that's what they're pushing Donald Trump to do.
You know, it's funny. If Jack Keane is outright saying there, I don't want any deal, let's just require forced surrender. There are others that seem to be a little bit more pragmatic, but maybe a little bit more immoral and unethical as well. Here is Jim Hansen. It's also on Fox News, and he's going to be saying, okay, this is out loud, by the way. Look, let's just tell Iran whatever they want to hear to get us to the midterms, and then we'll bring the hammer down.
President Trump does not want to go into the midterms with chaos in the Middle East, no oil flowing, the markets in response to that. He needs to have Republicans retain control of Congress so that he has freedom of maneuver after the midterms. But that doesn't mean he's going to give them what they want. He can keep them at bay with military force if he needs to, if they're not willing to make a deal. Between now and the midterms, he'll mitigate what damage they can cause to oil prices and our economy, and he'll hope that they will sign some sort of a short-term deal. After the midterms, I wouldn't want to be them.
So, I mean, he is literally saying, look, I know we've lied to them in the past and pretended in negotiations. Let's do it again and then just get to the midterms. And then with no more constraints, then we'll come in with the heavy weapons. How's that going to be received in Iran?
Well, I don't know Hansen, what his background is and what leads him to these conclusions, but there's something we ought to agree on right now, right up front. If Donald Trump ended this war unilaterally on his own and said, this is it, I've gone as far as I can go. It's in the interest of the global economy as well as our own for this war to end. So I'm going to disengage our forces from this war, and began a slow, deliberate, and methodical withdrawal. He would be cheered from coast to coast, from the Atlantic to the Pacific. The overwhelming majority of the American electorate wants nothing to do with this war. They don't care about it. They don't want it. They don't care about it. So there's no loss for Donald Trump in that sense politically. So he's dead wrong. In fact, if he ended this flat out, as we just discussed, and got out, I think we'd probably see a different outcome in the midterms. It certainly would be better than it will be at this point. But he doesn't seem to understand that. And that's understandable because he's probably part of that bubble that we were talking about earlier. And you have this minority that has enormous financial power that is in control. They want this war of annihilation waged against Iran. End of discussion, full stop. They're driving it. And Trump owes them enormous gratitude for his position in the White House and his position in politics. And I still think to some extent he must be under some form of duress.
You know, it's interesting that what you say there is maybe more true than some even realize. This past weekend, I was at an event where pollster Rich Barris was speaking, and he and I had a sidebar conversation, and he expressed some of his real frustration because he had recently went to the White House and told President Trump exactly what you just said, that the numbers support what you said profoundly. He said, especially among his base, there is overwhelming support for just ending this war right now and moving on. And they don't care about any of those things. I mean, literally every word you just said was validated by the data and the numbers. And this is a guy that President Trump respects because he's the one that got 2016 right when nearly all the other pollsters got it wrong. And it's puzzling him, and it's puzzling me why he's not making these decisions that are political winners for him, especially heading into the midterms, which makes me worried what you just said there, that maybe he's under duress for some other reason, which I can't divine.
Well, remember, Tucker Carlson back in 2023 brought me on his show up at his residence up there in New England. And the first question out of his mouth was, do you think we're on the road to war with Iran? And I unhesitatingly said yes. Now, he subsequently went to the White House a couple of years later, met with President Trump, and then he reported after he'd met with him that Donald Trump fully understood the pitfalls. In other words, the problems with a war against Iran. He understood the risks. He understood the implications, even the ramifications strategically for us. And he left the Oval Office satisfied that the president understood what he was getting into. And he concluded the president would not get into it as a result. Well, he was wrong. And the president knew then and understands now, and he's done it anyway. So I think we have to, it's wrong. People say, well, this man can't be this stupid. He is not a stupid man. Emotionally unbalanced. There are a lot of problems there, but this is not somebody who is stupid. He may not be well read or well versed in the world that we live in overseas beyond our borders. But this man is not stupid. He understands what he started, and he understands what he's doing. So when you look at this and you say, well, then what is going on? You have to reach two conclusions, and I gave you the first one. The first one is, well, I started this. It's the gambler's fallacy. I've got to finish it. One more throw of the dice and I'll win. That's one part. Secondly, people have got something on him, something that is so powerful. He cannot possibly deviate from the path that he's on.
And I guess only time is going to tell us which one of those is. I wonder, because you've got some direct experience with President Trump and rationally coming to a decision and then having somebody change his mind later in 2021, when you were the special advisor to the Secretary of Defense, you came up with what I consider to be a brilliant plan to have gotten all of our troops out of Afghanistan in order in a coordinated manner before the end of his term when he left. And you even went so far as to actually get him to sign an execution order, which was subsequently sabotaged by the Chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff and the acting Secretary of Defense afterwards. What did you see in his, because you mentioned that you don't think he's a stupid man, because you walked him through, as I understand, all of the benefits and the cost to potentially doing this. He came to the right conclusion, but then got talked out of it.
Well, I didn't walk him through the details, but he understood that it could be done. He understood, I think, that the winter was the ideal time. You've been in Afghanistan and you know the fighting season over there. The winter was a good time to pull out. But he was talked out of it. He was talked out of it by people in his own administration. That included the Secretary of Defense at the time. It also included Kash Patel, who went over with Mr. Miller, the Secretary of Defense. And they joined hands with Mitch McConnell and several other people from the Hill. And they all said, oh, you can't do this. We've already made commitments. We've talked to allies. We've this and that and everything else. And then he backed down and he said, well, what can I do? If I can't get everybody out, then what can I do? It's the old half pregnancy thing. And that's a political problem. No politician wants to bring the child to full term and then be responsible for it. So he backed down. And I think it was unfortunate. And the result is that what we saw under Biden was terrible. And it could have been avoided. But, he backed down. And this is one of the reasons that people accuse him of backing out on a number of different things. But this time around, I don't see any evidence for that. Maybe I'm wrong, but I just haven't seen it.
Yeah, well, I keep hoping so. But back to this gambler's fallacy here, trying to roll the dice and get something to happen. We just showed, the Hansen and Jack Keane and several others. They don't even want a deal. Well, it turns out there actually is some negotiations going on. It just doesn't include the United States. Here is the deputy Iranian foreign minister talking about the negotiations that are nearing a finalization between them and Oman, with an important caveat.
Significant progress has been made in the talks with Oman, and these advancements are on the verge of being finalized. We were not and are not actually looking to implement Clause 5 of the Memorandum of Understanding right now, because the United States has set aside all its obligations, and we, too, have set aside our obligation regarding the Strait of Hormuz. What we are doing with Oman is a natural path, regardless of whether a Memorandum of Understanding existed or not. I stated that if we want normal conditions to be established in the Strait of Hormuz, it must be through the path of understanding between Iran and Oman, not through the path of imposition and influence.
So the Iranians looked like they've said, you know what, I'm just leaving the U.S. behind. We're going to work on our own deal that's going on here. And then whereas President Trump is issuing these warnings he did in that first one, Iran is also issuing its own warnings by saying that they warned the Gulf states that any new U.S. strikes on Iran would trigger retaliatory attacks on their oil, power, water, and transportation networks. Reuters reports that Tehran delivered the message through senior diplomatic contacts with Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey, and Pakistan, urging regional partners to pressure Trump to abandon military action and return to negotiations. And from what we've been able to understand, that's why the last round didn't happen that previous weekend, because Saudi Arabia was the leading voice to say, don't do this because we're going to get hit and there's nothing you can do to stop it. How do you see this dynamic? And what if the whole region comes to some kind of accommodation without us even being involved?
Well, remember what President Trump said when he signed the MOU in Paris at Versailles. He said, I don't want to be Herbert Hoover, and I'm not going to be responsible for a global depression that results. So this is a man who understands the consequences. And what you just showed in that well, I don't know if it was a memorandum or it's just a tweet. What you showed states very clearly what the Iranians have said from the beginning. If you destroy our oil infrastructure, you destroy our power, water, and transportation networks, we will utterly obliterate everything on the other side of the Gulf. In other words, on the western side of the Persian Gulf. Now, I'm one of these people that is unconvinced that any of the little statelets that are on the western side of the Gulf are going to survive this. I don't think people in the United States realize how fragile those states are, how little they can mobilize in terms of military power to defend themselves. Saudi Arabia is viewed, like the UAE, as very duplicitous, as playing all sides to the middle. And so the Iranians, their attitude is these people have screwed us, taken advantage of us, hurt us, harmed us, cooperated with our enemies, the Israelis and others, on a routine basis. So we have no compunction or hesitation whatsoever about destroying them. I think President Trump realizes that, and I'm sure that he has been reluctant to take action. However, Israelis don't care. And their agents in Washington don't care. They could care less. As far as they're concerned, everybody in the region can die if it's going to promote their dominance, their control of the region. I mean, frankly, that's it. All you have to do is listen to the Israeli leadership. They make that abundantly clear. So I think we're back to where we started. President Trump, if he pushes, let's put it this way, there are three doors. Door number one is reopen the war with everything you've got. Door number two is do nothing. And door number three is do a little and then try to negotiate. Well, you've already tried door number one. You're going to go back to door number one? Well, maybe so. Door number two, do nothing. That's not up for consideration. He can't sustain himself politically. Money that is vital to his survival in the White House to deliver the Congress is at risk. Remember the hundreds of millions of dollars that are being assembled in various funds to destroy people like Thomas Massie, or for that matter, Marjorie Taylor Greene, or anyone who opposes this war with Iran. Those funds can be applied to destroy Donald Trump. And Donald Trump knows that. Right now, those funds are being committed to his support and defense. Those funds are vital to his survival because they can prevent any impeachment. So doing nothing is a non-starter. What about door number three? Well, we know that President Netanyahu was furious at President Trump's decision to postpone the attack. And lots of people are saying, well, he's reconsidering. But we also know there are problems with the munitions, and we are waiting for resupply, and we're bringing more aircraft into the theater. So there are other things going on here as well. So my point is, when you look at the three doors, you could try door three again, but that hasn't been very fruitful. So you're really being pushed back to door number one. which is all-out war.
And as you say, there's a problem with door number one again. Aside from the fact that it didn't work the first time, and the target set, and the Iranians underground caverns under these granite mountains, that hasn't changed either. But there is something different than the last time we tried door number one. Is that virtually all of our long-range precision missiles, according to reports, are running low, and that's the interceptors, and that's the offensive missiles, etc. But this morning, President Trump says, yeah, that's not true. He says the U.S. has massive amounts of munitions, especially of certain types. Additionally, large amounts are being manufactured and shipped to the U.S. as needed. Defense companies are building the largest number of plants and factories in our country's history. The leakers of these treasonous statements are being hunted down. Long-term jail sentences will be sought. So who's true? Is President Trump right, or is the media right?
Well, the media, forget the media. They're saying some things here about the missile stocks, precision-guided munition stocks, that frankly people have been saying for weeks and weeks and weeks. It's not a secret. So I don't know what he's talking about in terms of leakers. What I can tell you is that the defense industry, if you ask somebody at the top of the defense industry, I talked recently to someone who spent much of his life in it. He said, let's understand something, Doug. First of all, there is no declared war. In the absence of a declared war, we haven't mobilized industry. We're expecting industry to behave today the way it behaved in 1944-45 without mobilization. That's the first thing. You've got to essentially move resources, people, capabilities from the private sector into the defense sector. We haven't done it, and we're not going to get the outcome that he wants. And the other thing is that there's a big difference between building missiles and putting together jeeps or tanks. You're not just screwing on lug nuts. You're dealing with assembly lines that are very complex. They involve human beings, not just robotics. There are some robotics, but a lot of it is human intervention to ensure that the microchips, the microcircuitry, and everything else is where it belongs, because these are very expensive. It's use it once, throw it away. If you're going to use it, it has to work. And most of what we produce does have good reliability. Now, we can argue about the air and missile defense. That's a different issue. And a lot of that technology is not new. But if you look at the standard missiles, you look at the strike weapons that we have, those are really state of the art, and they have a very good performance rating. But you can't just produce them and crank them out the way we cranked out Sherman tanks or B-17 bombers. It doesn't work that way. So we got to say those things. And I think Trump, I assume he knows that. And these threats about people leaking, nobody's leaked anything of real significance. I certainly have never seen anything that I thought was classified. But there is such a thing as general knowledge. And people in the armed forces are not stupid. Sailors, soldiers, airmen, and Marines know what is real and what isn't. They know what they've got and what they don't. And so right now, the percentages, I've heard people say we've got only 20 to 30% of what we need. I've heard people saying only 20 or less. I've heard other people say different things. The point is that we have exhausted our arsenal to a large extent. Are we at risk now of going under in a war with a major power? Not unless we attack somebody and we're stupid. We could, but nobody wants a war with us. And I think probably inwardly President Trump understands that. And I think his view is, well, we're not giving up and we're going to use what we have and build back up later. I suspect that's going on as a conversation.
And what happens, Doug? Let's say that the Jack Keens and like the Tom Cottons and some of these others, they get their way, Netanyahu, and he goes ahead and he does this World War II style deal where he goes out even bigger than the first time. And I mean, just look, from 40 days, we burned through 40 to 60% of some of these categories just by itself. And if we went another, let's say 1 month, we could literally be out of some of these, or at least down to just like fumes in some of these categories. But the likelihood is, almost the certainty is, militarily speaking, we would be in no different position than we are today, except for a bunch of more Iranians would be dead, probably some more Americans would be dead, but we'd be in the same strategic place we are now. What are we going to do then? Because then they won't have the resources to go and fire a bunch more missiles. What are we going to do then?
Well, you and I agree that the high probability is that strategically, in 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever it turns out to be, and we don't know when he's going to pull the trigger, we'll be in the same position we were at the beginning. I think you're right. At that point, there's either nothing left or so little that we can't afford to continue. And of course, we're not even talking about what's happening in the private sector. We're not talking about the market.
Yeah.
You know, Trump has developed this culture of manipulation, which has helped to create the illusion of wealth and prosperity. The market keeps rising and rising, and everybody says this is great. It's back to, 1929 in June. Everything looked the way it does right now. October, things changed radically. But people that say those things are saying, no, you're wrong. No, it's not going to work that way. I keep telling people I'm not an expert, but I listen to people who are. And if you go down the list, you listen to Luke Groman and Jeffrey Gundlach, you listen to Pilkington or Jeff Curie on oil, the situation is not good. It's very, very fragile. It's very dangerous. And what they point to is something that most Americans don't pay any attention to, and that's you go and look at the treasuries and you say, well, the 10-year treasury is at 4.7. All the experts say if it rises to 5%, we're in real trouble. We won't be able to sustain that debt. We can't pay it all. We can't pay the required payment. And at the same time, they say, well, interest rates will fall. When they fall, that's okay. But, right now they're rising. And so that means bonds have to fall. Well, unfortunately, interest rates are rising and the bond yields are rising at the same time. This is sort of a double envelopment for disaster. But all the great men on Wall Street that are friends with Donald Trump are all saying, oh, no, don't worry about that. And remember what Mellon said in June of 1929. He was the Secretary of the Treasury. He was in Besant's job. And he said, we live in an era of unbroken prosperity.